Okay, it's 5 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Good evening, everyone. My name is Amber Stanley. I'm a senior planner at Pierce Transit, and I want to welcome you to Pierce Transit's live open house for the Stream Bus Rapid Transit System Expansion Study. Tonight, we'll be sharing an update on the current findings of this project. You'll be hearing from both Pierce Transit staff and from Pierce Transit's consulting team. Next slide, please. Before we begin the presentation, please note that everyone is muted by default. However, the chat and Q&A function will be monitored throughout the presentation. Please add your questions and comments there. We'll take questions both during and after the presentation. I also want to note that if you have a question or feedback you wish to share later, you can do so by visiting our website at ridestream.org and submit those via our comment form. That form will remain open through July 15th. This presentation will also be posted there for your reference. Additionally, we have a live Spanish interpretation and closed captioning available for tonight's presentation. If you'd like to utilize those functions, please use the appropriate button on your Zoom menu to access those features. Next slide, please. For today's open house, we're going to share the corridor alignment options, present key findings from an online survey that was administered a few months ago, summarize the corridor evaluation results, and confirm that the results make sense. Part of this presentation will be interactive, but we'll discuss the specifics of that later in the presentation. Before we continue, we want to know how you heard about tonight's event and ask that you take a moment to answer the survey of the question that should be appearing on your screen. Go ahead and give you a few moments to do that before we move on. Still seeing responses roll in, so I'm going to leave it up for a few more moments. Okay, thank you. All right, if you can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So what is Stream? Before we jump into the expansion study, I want to share a little bit about what Stream is. Stream is Pierce Transit's brand for bus rapid transit, which is also more commonly referred to as BRT. The benefit of BRT service is that it's more frequent and more reliable than some of the standard bus service you might be used to. BRT buses also have improved passenger amenities and comfort, such as onboard bike storage and platforms that span the entire length of the bus, which makes it easier for boarding and offboarding. Additionally, BRT buses are distinctly branded to differentiate from local bus service. Next slide, please. Before we discuss the expansion study, I want to give a quick update about our current Stream 1 project. This project will be the first BRT service in all of Pierce County, and it will serve the 14.4-mile corridor between downtown Tacoma and Spanaway. If you're familiar with Pierce Transit service, you'll know that this is the current Route 1. Construction for this project is slated to begin in the fall of 2024 with an opening service scheduled for 2027. Now I'm going to hand it off to Thomas Brennan, one of our consultants from Nelson Nygaard, to discuss the expansion study.
Good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and thanks, Amber, for the introduction. Again, I'm Thomas Brennan. I work for Nelson Nygaard Consulting. We're a consultant working with Pierce Transit on the Stream System Expansion Study. The System Expansion Study is a technical and data-driven evaluation of potential future Stream bus rapid transit corridors. So as Amber mentioned, Stream 1, as she described, will be the first of this type of investment. But Pierce Transit has identified in its Destination 2040 long-range plan update that there are other corridors in the Pierce Transit service area that merit this type and level of enhanced bus rapid transit investment. So this study really looks at what those corridors are and what the opportunity is for the next Stream BRT investment. We began this project in the summer of 2021, so we're almost a year into what's been a pretty intensive effort. A lot of work's been conducted over the last number of months, really identifying the key corridors and options for the corridors that we would evaluate for the next stream BRT investment, engaging the public through different mechanisms to get their input on opportunities and needs, doing a very detailed technical evaluation of those corridors, which we'll talk a lot about tonight. We're at a point now where we're sharing that evaluation and preliminary results with you, the members of the community. We'll take the input from this round of outreach and some additional engagement with the municipal and county stakeholders and wrap up the study later this year. To provide a little bit of context, important context on what we'll be talking about tonight, the long-range plan I mentioned, the Destination 2040 plan, was a comprehensive look at Pierce Transit's service offerings and opportunities for capital projects throughout its service area. That work let us know that there are really 4 key corridors, which for the sake of this study, we've called corridors A, B, C, and D. We've used letters in order not to confuse with the route numbering that many people may be familiar with, but generally these corridors do follow what you may be familiar with as Pierce Transit existing bus routes. So corridor A runs from downtown Tacoma out to Lakewood using 19th and then traveling south through University Place to Lakewood Transit Center along the pathway of what current Route 2 is. Corridor B also starts on the north end in downtown Tacoma and also ends at Lakewood Transit Center, but uses the pathway of what's the current Route 3. Corridor C is on the east side of the service area. It runs from Puyallup to the Sunrise neighborhood at 176th. Many of you may be familiar with the Route 402 service that serves that corridor. And then corridor D is the one primarily east-west corridor in the evaluation, running from Lakewood Transit Center on the west to Pierce College on the east. So those are the 4 sort of main corridor geographies that the study is looking at. We do want to show you some additional information about these corridors. So this graphic shows the average daily ridership for each of the current routes serving these corridors. So you'll see in the blue study corridor A, also Route 2. This is fall 2019 boarding data. So that's the number of people on average that boarded the Route 2 in the fall of 2019 on a weekday, on a Saturday, and then on Sunday. Also showing that ridership for corridors B, C, and D. You'll see that the corridor C has 2 different colors there. That's because we're not looking at the full extent of the 402. So the darker colored portion is the portion of the 402 that we're studying as part of this effort. It's notable that a number of these corridors tie into major transit centers in downtown Tacoma and the Lakewood Transit Center. And those are major points of ridership generation. Next slide, Paul. So as we have worked through our analysis, we've really spent a lot of time in the field, looked at the different markets that we're serving and what people's travel needs are, and thought about overall system connectivity for each of these corridors. So as we talk through the 4 corridors, we have both the sort of primary corridor option, which I described, but for each of the corridors, we have 1 or 2 sort of additional, what we would call alignment options or variations. So for corridor A, I described again the initial alignment. We also have one we're calling A1, which if you look at the south end of the map, has an additional extension from the Lakewood Transit Center down to the Lakewood Sounder Station. So slightly different alignment, extending further to the south and making a connection to Lakewood Sounder. And then A2 is a shortened alignment, which essentially runs from Tacoma Community College to Lakewood Transit Center. And we looked at this in large part because, as you may know, Sound Transit, as part of their Sound Transit 3 regional rail expansion package, has a plan to extend rail service west along South 19th Street. So this option would provide a future connection to that rail service without the duplication along South 19th Street. Corridor B, similarly, we have the initial alignment that is consistent with the current route service, but also I developed a couple alignment alternatives, which are primarily different in the central portion of the alignment, in that corridor B1 extends further south along Pacific Avenue and ties westward along South 38th, connecting to the mall and using South 47th to connect back to South Tacoma Way. And then B2 travels a little bit further south and uses South 48th Street to connect to the mall and then back to South Tacoma Way. Both of these options were identified as opportunities to serve areas with established existing business and residential neighborhoods. Corridor C, again, is on the east side of the service area out in Puyallup. And we have just one alignment variation here. So the identified alignment in the long range plan runs from Puyallup Sounder Station down to 176th in the Sunrise neighborhood. The second option extends a bit further north to Edgewood. So essentially running from Edgewood, connecting in at the Puyallup Sounder Station, and then again terminating in the Sunrise neighborhood at the south. And then finally, for corridor D, again, this is the east-west corridor that runs primarily along 112th Street south. The variations here are D1 sort of shortens this alignment a bit to terminate at the South Hill Mall Transit Center instead of going all the way to Pierce College. And then D2 uses a slightly different routing on the western portion of the alignment to serve the Lakewood Sounder Station. So I know that was a lot, but that's a important briefing on the 4 primary corridors and the sub-variations of those that we looked at in our technical study. Wanted to stress that we, as part of our work, conducted an online survey. We used online tool that allowed people to get on, look at the corridors, and let us know what ideas they had about additional destinations they might like Stream BRT to serve, places along the corridor where they found access to be challenging, and these future investments could help to improve those challenging access conditions, and/or places they felt that crossing the street was unsafe and could use safety improvements. We also asked about places where we saw delay on existing bus routes, using that as an opportunity for us to think about how BRT investments could speed up and make bus service more reliable. This survey was conducted earlier this year during the winter months. We received about 418 unique survey responses and got about 472 individual pins placed on the map, providing us with input on the survey. It is notable that this wasn't a statistically valid survey. About 72% of respondents who responded to the survey were in the Tacoma area. So not a completely geographically representative survey, but a good response nonetheless. Just some key findings from the survey and what we heard. A lot of interest in opportunities for BRT investments to improve pedestrian safety, using ideas such as additional pedestrian crossings, potential new signals, and other improvements that would allow pedestrian access and crossing to and from the bus to be done safely. Some ideas about routing and station locations. So some of the alternatives that I just spoke through about routing were informed by interest we got from the survey. And we won't talk a lot about it tonight, but one of the things we had to do for our evaluation is to assume some conceptual station locations. So we definitely heard a lot of input about where people would like to see stations along these lines. And then we also collected input and heard concerns about congestion and delay that makes transit less reliable than people would hope to enjoy. So we noted specific areas of potential improvement for transit speed and reliability. Corridors like Meridian, probably no surprise to many, were identified as places where the bus was delayed due to traffic. An important component of our analysis that we'll talk about as we get into the evaluation results, and something we really tried to center throughout our work and evaluation, was work to ensure that we're in accounting for people who need and rely on transit. Part of this work was to develop an equity index, really looking at where there were higher concentrations of non-white or Hispanic populations, low-income households, foreign-born peoples, people with limited English speaking in their household, and people with disabilities throughout the study area. You can see a map here that shows this overall index by relatively small analysis zones throughout the study area. And just an overall summation of the equity index score as a compilation of this information along each corridor. So in order to evaluate and prioritize the 4 corridors and the sub-corridor alternatives that I talked through, we used an approach that really broke our evaluation down into 5 separate categories that really are intended to align with Pierce Transit's goals in serving the community and the goals of the many cities and Pierce County and other stakeholders who participated in this process, recognizing that high quality transit service provides an important mobility function, but also has many other important functions for people in the communities it serves, as well as for the local jurisdictions and county overall. Each of these we've titled and we'll talk through in quite a bit of detail as we move through the presentation, but they include a account we're calling Enhance, which is really looking at how providing BRT service to Pierce County can focus in areas with the highest demand and places where people have the highest need. One we're calling Connect, which is really about looking at how these different alignment options connect residents with jobs and services and other daily activities that they do or could use transit to access. Grow and Prosper refers to the ability for BRT services and projects to improve service to areas with transit supportive land uses areas that communities expect to grow and could use better mobility in the future, and locations that support access to local businesses. Our sustain group of criteria is really about transit's role in reducing carbon emissions, reducing overall vehicular travel and vehicular emissions, and promoting other forms of sustainable travel, such as walking and biking, which many people do to get to transit. And finally, delivery really refers to the ability for Pierce Transit to get each of these projects funded and move it forward through completion. So a lot of what we looked at in this category really has to do with key criteria that potential funding partners such as the Federal Transit Administration would look at to see how competitive each of these corridor projects would be for competitive grant funds. So we'll give you a kind of quick look at the overall results of our evaluation first, but then plan to dig in and walk through this in quite a lot of detail. So if this graphic looks a little overwhelming, you should understand it much better by the time our meeting is over. But we did want to share with you what we found, and as we looked at each of these alignment alternatives, we rated from 1 being the lowest to 5 being the highest using a technical rating process, each of these key accounts. And then as we look at that sort of total score, we see that corridor B was the overall highest rated corridor based on our 5 accounts. And in corridor B, the B2 alignment, which we looked at earlier, which uses 48th as an alignment option, was the overall highest rated corridor. The second highest rated corridor was corridor A, and the kind of A option that's consistent with the current RAP 2 was the highest rated amongst those.
Before we move on, Tom, we do have one question here asking how Shuttle is affected for this service.
How Shuttle is affected?
Yes, and the question, let's see here. And if costs are going up. Okay, thank you for the reply, Darren. Darren's chimed in and said Shuttle would not be affected. The proposed routes would only replace current fixed routes once implemented over the next 20 years. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that, Darren.
Yeah, and we have time, Darren, if you want to speak to that more.
You mean answering the shuttle related question?
Yeah, do you have anything else you want to add before we continue?
No, I just want to make it clear that this is strictly to upgrade or improve service on existing fixed routes. The shuttle parent transit service, which is on demand, is a completely different Pierce Transit service. So they interact, but they would not, I mean, the only way they would directly relate would be taking a shuttle customer to or from an existing fixed route, which could eventually become a bus rapid transit route. But that's a real-time on-demand service that I don't see any trouble or any dilemmas or challenges connecting to shuttle and vice versa in the future, because the BRT routes are still fixed routes. It's just a higher frequency, better quality fixed route service.
Thank you, Darren. Good question, Roxanne. Yeah. Okay, I don't see anything else coming up, so we're okay to continue.
Amber, there was one that said, are costs going up? I didn't see who sent that question in the chat.
Sent by the same person.
Oh, it is. Okay.
Roxanne. Yeah.
I wonder if she means our shuttle paratransit cost per ride going up, or she just mean overall?
That's
clear.
A great question. Roxanne, if you can clarify in the chat box here, we can answer that for you. She means all services.
Yes. I think in general, but I'm not 100% sure on the amounts or percentages they're going up as far as per ride, if at all. We'd have to probably look into that, getting back to her.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Roxanne. And I had sent her a private message earlier, so please don't hesitate to reach out to me or use the comment form on our website if you have additional questions. We're happy to follow up with you. Okay, I don't see anything else coming up, so we're okay to move on. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Paul Lightman. I'm also with the consulting team supporting Pierce Transit in this stream study. Before we dive into all of the accounts and metrics, we want to introduce an engagement process that we hope you will participate in. And to do so, we're asking you to, we're using Menti, and there's two ways that you can interact with us. One is by your computer, or if you have a mobile device, you can scan the QR code. So if you're joining by computer, go to menti.com, MENTI.com, and you'll type in this code to be able to see the questions that we'll be asking you. And the code is 13701772. And then if you're joining by mobile device, you can scan the QR code you see on the right-hand side of your screen, and that should bring you to the questions. So our first question, maybe I'll give people a few seconds just to get to this location, but I'll say our first question will be a test just to make sure everyone is able to join in and know how it works before we dive into each of the accounts and the metrics and get your feedback for each account. All right, I will proceed to the next slide, and I will note that the code 13701772 will appear at the top of your screen. And I see some of you might be already responding, perhaps. It's flickering for me, hopefully you don't see that. But so this first test question we'll try out is, which national park in Washington is your favorite? So we'll be asking very similar questions of like a multiple choice response when we go into the accounts. And maybe we'll give people a few minutes or a few seconds to see if they can fill out the poll. And if anyone's having issues or need me to go back to the previous screen, let us know in the Q&A box. I don't see anything coming in, so I don't know if people are having trouble accessing the poll.
I'm getting some comments, and I think, Paul, it might have skipped to the next question. Really? So I'm getting comments that say the first real question we want is what's coming up, not the test one.
The question that appears, Paul says, do these screening results for Enhance make sense to you?
Okay, that is the wrong one.
Yes, no, or not sure. The test question did not come up. This dummy question or test question did not come up.
Well, that's unfortunate. I'm sorry about that. I guess maybe we'll just proceed and then hope it works for that first question. Oh no, I guess that's the enhanced results, which must have proceeded before I. Oh, I know what happened. Okay. So I guess we'll jump to the enhanced numbers. The enhanced data. I will go through some of the results that we're seeing part of enhance, and then we can dive back to that question. So enhance is the criteria or the account we're using for anything related to usually existing density, so the number of people and jobs that are along the corridor. And we had 3 different metrics that we used to assess this. The first one was the number of. Sorry, this is enhance. Yes, sorry, enhance. So we looked at number of daily boardings in 2040, so about two decades from today, and how many people would be along each corridor. And corridor B, B2 in particular, had the highest ridership, but all of the B options had more than 4,000 boardings per day. And quarters A and D followed between 2,000 and 3,000 boardings per day along those corridor options. And then quarter C had the fewest with about 1,000 boardings per day. We also looked at the level of ridership in 2040, comparing that to a future without Stream. So what benefit would Stream provide us? And we saw that the largest increase in ridership would also be on all the quarter B options, particularly B2, with an increase of more than 2,500 passengers compared to standard service with Route 3. We also saw about 1,000 additional boardings with Stream on quarters A, all the quarter options for A and D. And we saw the fewest additional boardings with quarters C, being like 300 and 700 passengers for those quarter options. And the last metric we used as part of Enhance was to identify what percentage of the boardings on each of the corridor is occurring in equity areas. And as Tom described before, these are the areas that are serving equity populations such as non-white or Hispanic individuals and people with lower incomes. So the map that you see in the slide on the screen, these pink zones are those equity areas, and the green lines are the corridors, and the thickness of that line represents the load, the number of passengers passing through that area in the PM peak. And so we saw that about almost all the boardings on all the quarter options for A and B are occurring in equity areas. As you can see, those pink zones fall largely through Tacoma, where those corridors are located, but much fewer boardings occur in equity areas on corridors C and D because of those fewer equity zones along those corridors. And instead of showing the slide, let me move this up. This was our test question, but let me go to the next. So Enhance, I see some of you already responded. We want to know, do these results make sense to you? So we're seeing that quarter B2 rises to the top for most of the options, but particularly B1 and B2, as well as the A options. So does this make sense? Do the results seem to reflect what you would expect? So we'll give you a few seconds to respond to that question before we move on.
Thank you, Paul. And that helps answer some of the questions that we have in the chat and the Q&A for those of you who noted that it didn't make sense before. So the question that you initially saw was for the information that Paul just went over. And then we do have another question that asks, how will you present, oh, just jumped away from me. How will you present this information to people who are not available at this time or do not have good internet or computer access? And thank you to Darren for answering that question here. If you're unable to see that in the Q&A, Darren's response says the presentation is being recorded and will be posted to our website. He posts a link of it there. And then in addition, anyone who wants to ask a direct question can contact either him or myself. And then I want to also add that on our website, we do have that comment response box. So if something comes to mind for you, or if somebody has a question, we have that available until July 15th. And so they can ask it there, and then we will follow up if they provide their contact information. The next question we have is, how was ridership in 2040 estimated?
Good question. So the Puget Sound Regional Council has a model that they forecast growth and density, which is like number of people and jobs throughout the region. And that was the base that we used. But there's also on top of that, we identified potential stop locations and travel patterns where people are traveling to and from. And we developed a model to estimate the trip pairs that people are taking and the likelihood that they would use transit for their trip. And this is a common method that is used for estimating transit ridership. And that's how we did it with Stream.
I would just add that the ridership forecasting model that we used is one that has been used regularly throughout the Puget Sound to model ridership on many of the Sound Transit, rail and bus lines, as well as other bus rapid transit lines like the Rapid Ride, several Rapid Ride lines that King County Metro has rolled out. So every time it's used, it's updated to help better reflect its ability to predict future ridership, which is not a perfect science, but it's a very good tool for estimating what the likely benefits in terms of the number of people using each line would be and where they would be likely to board along the line.
Wonderful, thank you. And we have another question here asking, do you think the travel patterns are likely to change in less than 20 years?
So generally travel patterns, are changing in relatively small ways, but one of the things that, regional planning provides for is a pretty good understanding of how communities grow in the future. So all the local jurisdictions and municipalities within the Pierce Transit service area are working with their regional partners to estimate where they would grow and how fast they would grow. So the ridership forecasting that we're doing is taking into account not just where people live and where people travel today, but also where new housing is expected, how job centers are expected to grow or shift. So again, it really is a best regional understanding estimate. That said, things happen. No one expected COVID to happen, and that certainly changed things a little bit. But we are starting to see that travel patterns are resuming to patterns that are more similar to what we saw before the pandemic, and certainly expect that trend to continue. So by 2040, we feel pretty confident that the analysis that we've done is the best we can provide at this point in time.
Thank you. We have another question about security. Are there going to be more security?
I can take this one. Amber, you might have some ideas as well.
Sure, yeah.
But generally, some of the features of bus rapid transit are enhanced stations. So those would include larger platforms. Better lighting is often an important feature of bus rapid transit platforms. So people who are traveling at night or in the early morning would be in a better illuminated place as they approach and wait at the platform. So those are certainly features that improve security.
Yeah, I know that's exactly what I was going to mention, Thomas. So just those added security features that we have and that we're very mindful of at Pierce Transit. And, as the project continues to develop, we'll release some designs, but it will be a very similar design to what you see for Stream 1. So if you've seen the renderings for those stations, you can see some of the lighting there, and they'll follow a very similar format. And we do have another question that came in. So were Tacoma planning documents used, such as the Tacoma Mall sub-area plan? I realize it's too early to incorporate home in Tacoma.
Yeah, so great question. And part of our process was close engagement with all the municipalities and Pierce County. We put together and met multiple times with a technical advisory committee, which included a number of stakeholders, including transportation and land use planners from the local jurisdictions. We met individually with the city of Tacoma and other jurisdictions, got their latest thinking on land use plans. So both plans that you mentioned were certainly considered, and we took that into account by looking at the regional projections that were input into the ridership forecast and kind of comparing with those plans to make sure that the assumptions were consistent. So again, as you mentioned, there may be some evolution of those still, but we felt like the the population and job projections that we use were reflective of what the realization of those plans would bring.
Thank you. So that brings us to the end of our questions for now.
Right. So now let's discuss the second of the 5 accounts, which is Connect. And the metrics that are included in Connect are primarily related to existing density, which is the number of people and jobs along the corridor. The first metric is population and employment density, where we're looking at the number of people and jobs within a half mile of each corridor relative to the length of that corridor. And what we're seeing is very similar values for corridors A and B, about 2,000 households per corridor mile, and about half that for corridors C and D, about 1,000 households per corridor mile. And but we do see higher concentrations of jobs along corridor options for B, about 4,000 to 5,000 jobs per mile. And this is due to the higher concentrations of jobs both in downtown Tacoma, but also along South Tacoma Way and near Tacoma Mall. The second metric we looked at was the density of equity-weighted populations per mile, and the map on the right shows the density of employment, but weighted by double weight for low-income jobs, and those were jobs that have incomes of about $3,300 per month or less. And we saw that both A and B had very similar values, with about 1,200 to 1,500 equity-weighted equity-weighted populations, and that was very similar to the values we saw in the previous account, showing that more the equity zones were primarily occurring on corridors A and B. And I guess this map does show, the darker shade is the higher concentration of those jobs. And we see that occurring downtown Tacoma, near Tacoma Mall, and near Lakewood Town Center. The third metric we looked at was connectivity to regional services. And this was primarily focusing on regional transit service. And we looked at the Sounder, which is the region's commuter rail service operated by Sound Transit that travels from Lakewood Sounder Station up to downtown Seattle. There are, of our 11 corridor options that we analyzed, 7 of those connect with a Sounder station, either at Lakewood Sounder Station, South Tacoma Sounder Station, and Puyallup Station. So even though they all connect to Sounder, corridor C actually had the greater number of Sounder trips that it would connect to in 2040, because of assumed increased frequency that would operate between Tacoma Dome Station and downtown Seattle, with 32 trips per day. All the other stations at South Tacoma Sounder Station and Lakewood Station would have 24 Sounder trips per day. And we'll note that we did not look at connectivity with the link or the A line, because none of the stream corridors would connect directly with the link at Tacoma Dome Station. So now we will go back to Menti, and let's see if this works. Are you, maybe I need to also need to do 2 things. Let me connect to this slide. Yes, that works. And if you forgot the code, it's at the top of the screen, 13701772. We'll ask you, do the results for Connect make sense? And that we're also seeing that corridor B is scoring highest, followed roughly by A, and then C and D. So do these results make sense to you? Thank you to those 7 people who have responded. Maybe as we wait, in case others want to add the responses. Amber, were there any questions that have come in for
There's no
Connect?
questions, but I do just want to note that I'm getting some responses in the Q&A box, and so I don't have any no's. They're all yeses so far.
Okay, great.
And I'm not seeing anything else come in yet.
Okay, and we're still at 7. So maybe everyone who, actually you see something, looks like the screen actually shows something different. I see a number 2 down here at the bottom right, but on this other screen there's 7, which maybe is the more up-to-date one. So this says we have 7 people who have responded, and that hasn't changed for a bit. So maybe should we move on to the next account, or should we hold on for a few seconds?
I think we're okay to move on. I don't see anything else coming through for the chat or the questions, and yeah, I think we're okay.
Okay, so I will pass it back to Tom to go through the remaining 3 accounts.
Thanks, Paul. Our next account is the one we call Grow and Prosper. And this looks really at future land use and how our BRT corridor options are serving known future land uses. So some of the discussion we just had is related to this. I will say as a preface that as our Pierce Transit works with the Federal Transit Administration to advance these projects, with some potential grant funding, one of the things that the Federal Transit Administration will be very interested in is both some of the data that Paul showed. How strong is the current market for transit? How many people live along the corridor? How many jobs, how many services exist along the corridor? But they're also interested in how the communities are growing and how that can affect future transit performance and the sort of broader benefit that high quality, high capacity transit brings to areas of growth. So one of the things we're going to look at is where and to what level we'll be serving people along these corridors given 2040 conditions. So similar to the current conditions, but for 2040, we looked at the number of households within a half mile of each corridor, and we normalized that by corridor mile. So if the corridor was a bit longer, it wasn't penalized. Again, we see corridor B being the strongest with the B2 option serving a few hundred more people than B and B1. We also looked at the percentage change in households along each of the corridor. Again, trying to understand where the most growth is expected. And so what the opportunity for these investments to pick up additional ridership. Again, the percent change in households within a half mile of each corridor was the highest by quite a significant amount in corridor B. We also looked at then future jobs. Obviously, a lot of people use transit to get to jobs. And so looking at 2040 job projections and where those jobs are likely to be, we again saw that corridor B ranked the highest, and B was a little bit higher than B1 and B2 by about 700 or 800 jobs served. And again, we looked at the percentage change in jobs. So where is the greatest increase in jobs expected? Again, that was along corridor B, with the B and B2 options about the same at 70% increase. And then we also took into account the regional growth designations and areas of local importance that tie back to key regional planning documents. So these include regional centers, manufacturing and industrial centers where we'd expect a lot of jobs, as well as some of the county-wide centers and centers of local importance. So again, these are places that there's likely to be more active planning for future transit supportive growth. So again, looked at of all those locations, many of which you see mapped here, which corridors served the most. And it sounds like a broken record here, but again, corridor B was the highest. Corridor A was not too far behind, and corridors C and D were served about roughly a third of the number of regional centers and areas of local importance. So Paul will flip it back to the Menti poll. And again, we're just looking for your confirmation of whether these metrics and the results that we're showing make sense based on your understanding of your communities and the neighborhoods that we're talking about here. And please feel free to get your questions going in the chat, and Amber will monitor that.
I don't see questions, but I am getting some yes responses.
Okay. Give folks just a minute to think about this one, see if they have any questions. Got a not sure. If you're not sure and you want to ask us a question, please feel free to.
Give it another moment or two. If you would like to go ahead and ask a question or send in the chat, we're happy to answer it now. And then, as I mentioned earlier, if you'd like to follow up with us later and privately, happy to do that. Our email addresses will be made available at the end of the presentation. And then you can also send us a comment via our website. Okay, I'm not seeing anything come in.
Great. Well, we'll move on to our fourth of 5 accounts, and this is the one we're calling sustain. And as you can see, this really helps us take a look at the role of each of these potential BRT corridors in reducing greenhouse gas emissions and improving use of active transportation. So our first criteria looks at the potential greenhouse gas emissions benefit or reductions in greenhouse gas emissions that are created by people shifting modes, generally from driving or driving alone to use of transit. This is one of the things that the ridership model helps us to estimate how many new trips there are and how many of those new trips are likely to have shifted from a fossil fuel producing mode, such as driving a gas vehicle. And again, not surprisingly, since the lines with the highest ridership are also likely to have the highest benefit in reducing greenhouse gas emissions, we see that corridor B, specifically B2, has the highest, with a total of about 1,800 kilograms of daily greenhouse gas emissions reduced. I'm not sure if that means much to folks, but I have read that your average American produces about a kilogram to a kilogram and a half of greenhouse gases a day. So pretty meaningful reduction for Pierce County. Another thing that we wanted to look at was just the quality of the walking and cycling network. One of the things that we know about high quality transit is it does help to increase active transportation. We know that walking and biking is healthy for folks. And so more people walking and biking to the bus and in neighborhoods certainly has a benefit, not just for the environment, but also for human health. So it's an important outcome of our work. So the one way to look at this, since we don't know kind of all the details of the specific improvements that will come through the project, is to really look at how supportive the local street system is for walking and biking access. And one way that urban planners think about this is just looking at kind of the quality and the density of the pedestrian network. So do streets have sidewalks, and is there a nice connected grid of streets that allow you to get places without walking too far out of direction? So that sort of intersection density score, again, we see B2 ranking the highest. And finally, we wanted to look at sort of transit mode share along each of these corridors, which is to say, what percentage of people in each of the corridors would likely be on transit over the course of the day versus other modes. So that remaining 87% for corridor A1, for example, could be folks in a single occupancy automobile, in a carpool, walking or biking. But generally we see that a number of these projects would increase transit mode share over 10%, and that in the instance of B2, we could expect as much as 23% of travel in that corridor to be on transit, which is a pretty impressive percent of people moved by the bus. That's those are some of the criteria that we looked at to think about how these candidate corridors would contribute to environmental and health outcomes.
We do have one question that just came in. It says for the segment of B2 on Pacific Avenue 38th through 48th, how do you account for this also being on the route of Stream 1? Double count?
If the question is around the ridership benefit, the modeling is able to, the model actually looks at all transit trips throughout the region, but it's able to assign trips to specific services. So this is not, any numbers we would report here would be in addition to riders that were using the Stream 1 corridor. So it may be that that segment along Pacific Avenue actually has a higher overall transit use. Some of those riders boarding the Stream 1 service, and some of those riders boarding this candidate corridor service. Feel free to let me know if that answers your question.
Thank you, Thomas. I don't see anything else coming in yet, but I will let you know. Confirmation that you clearly answered it, so thank you.
Okay, thank you. And again, same exercise here with the Menti poll. And again, or feel free to just type yes, no, or not so sure in the chat as well. That's fine.
I don't have anything coming in on my end.
Great. Well, why don't we move on to our fifth and final account. And this one is one we're called Deliver. And as I mentioned earlier, here we're really looking at some measures of effectiveness that are important both to Pierce Transit as the agency building the project, very important to potential funders who might contribute grant funds to help build this type of project, but also important to passengers as well in terms of the benefits they could see as someone traveling in the corridor and hoping to make their trip a little bit more quickly. So the cost effectiveness criteria we've looked at in two ways, and this gets a little wonky, maybe a little bit of planner talk here, but it is an important measure in that having a cost-effective project is really important to our potential funders. So Pierce Transit's ability to build these projects relies on cost effectiveness. And for these first two metrics, the lower the number, the better the ranking. So the first looks at the total capital cost, so the actual cost to build the infrastructure, the stations, any in-street improvements to pedestrian access, all the capital components that might require buying new vehicles or pouring concrete. That cost sort of divided by the number of annual riders. So how many people are using the service relative to how much it costs. You can see that the B2 option is by far the most cost effective, almost 100% less than kind of the next best corridor in terms of cost effectiveness. The second measure is one we talk about as total annualized capital cost plus the net annual operating cost. So basically what that means is we're taking a look at how much it would cost to operate the service plus what it would cost what it would be to annualize the cost of that service per rider. So again, that is super geeky. But again, it gives us an important sense of not just the cost effectiveness of building the project, but the cost effectiveness of building and running the project over time. So again, we see that B2 is the most cost effective of these projects, in some cases being 3 or 4 times more cost effective than other options. And then finally, one that's important both to current passengers and potential future passengers, but also to funding partners, is how much travel time savings we're achieving through the features of bus rapid transit that Amber described earlier on. So some of the ways that the bus moves faster include potential in-street priority, things like bus lanes or queue jumps, improved signal operations that give transit better movement through the intersection. Some of the station improvements that Amber talked about, longer stations where passengers can board at all doors, helps the bus sit at the station a shorter amount of time, so the bus can get going and keep moving quicker. All those things in combination, help to improve the end-to-end travel time for any of these corridors. So we can see that all 4 corridors see at least a 10% reduction in end-to-end travel time. So that's a pretty significant improvement. We do see some slight kind of variations in those improvements. This is a place where actually corridor D, the Puyallup Lakewood corridor, scores the best with about a 10% improvement for a metric which just considers signals, all-door boarding, stop consolidation elements, and then about a potential 13% improvement if we also factor in places where we identified opportunity for in-street improvements like transit lanes or queue jumps. So that's a case where corridor D scores the highest. Again, one last time with the Menti poll. Do these results make sense?
We have a yes coming through in the chat, nothing in the Q&A at the moment.
And I actually lied. That's not our last Menti poll, but almost. So sorry about that.
I don't have anything else coming in on my end.
Let's get to the punchline then. So as a wrap up, and this should be no surprise, having sat through that detailed explanation, we did want to reveal kind of the top rated corridors. So this is the overall score on an equally weighted footing for all of the main corridors and their variations. And we'll see that corridor B2 was the one that ranked the highest with a total score of 19.5. A was obviously the second highest, and the A variation was the highest rank there. So we wanted just to, I guess, have folks reflect on, having seen the full evaluation, and I know we showed you a lot. Does this make sense? And do you have any questions about kind of our overall approach or methodology, or how we got to this conclusion through our this technical data-driven approach? So our question is do you feel like our set of measures was comprehensive, and did we get the right measures to help Pierce Transit inform their board of directors about a recommendation for Stream BRT future investments? Okay. We like to see yeses. And of course are open to your other inputs as well.
I have another yes. Graphics and maps are helpful. Thank you for that comment. I'd just like to say, any feedback like that is really helpful for us, because we're doing a lot of engagement in presentations, and so we want to improve and make things better. So thank you. I don't see anything else coming in.
All right, so what's next? So the next steps for Pierce Transit and the team coming out of this part of the study will be to take the top few ranked corridors and run those through a more detailed, what we're calling funding potential assessment. So this will actually take kind of the top corridor alternatives and run them through a series of criteria that the Federal Transit Administration uses to administer competitive grant funds. So that will give us a better idea, better informed sense of which of these corridors will be most competitive for federal funding. Again, these are expensive projects, so Pierce Transit wants to leverage dollars from outside the region, from the federal government, to help pay for these projects. So the ability to do that will be kind of a next piece of our assessment. Pierce Transit also wants to ensure that its agency and municipal partners are ready to go and on board to help build these projects. So we'll be working with partner agencies in the corridor geographies to ensure that interests are synced and they're willing and ready to commit the effort to help implement these projects. Then in the September timeframe, the Pierce Transit staff will take the recommendation from the expansion study to the board for approval, and that will include a recommendation for the next stream corridor investment. I think it is worth mentioning here that while that recommendation will include the next corridor to move into project development, it's really the assumption of Pierce Transit that the hope is to build out a network of corridors. So if one of these corridors is not the next, it doesn't mean that Pierce Transit won't be continuing to work and think about the sequence of implementation, planning and implementation for the other three corridors as well. With the board approval in hand, then the Pierce Transit can commence the process to really start grant applications and beginning planning work. That is extensive and multi-year process to really plan and design one of these corridors. The final report for this study should be released by the end of this year. So following board approval, but not by too much. And then in 2023, 2024, it's expected that the Pierce Transit will enter into an agreement with the Federal Transit Administration that we refer to as project development. It's basically a kind of a written agreement that Pierce Transit will work directly with the Federal Transit Administration as a future potential funding partner to help answer all their questions about why this project is a good one and why they should contribute federal grant funds to help build it. So still a lot of work to be done, but this is an important step in making sure that we have strong community buy-in in the recommendations that move forward later this year.
Thank you, Thomas. And with that, we'll open it up for additional questions. If you have any, please drop one in. And I see we've got one up now, asking how soon will this be posted to the Pierce Transit website? It's a great question. Our goal is to have it posted by the end of the week. Not seeing any other questions come through just yet. Have a feedback or a comment that says talking about funding partners helps the community know it's not just us. Thank you. Yes. Okay, well, I'm not seeing any additional questions or comments come through at this time. Just as another reminder, though, please don't hesitate to reach out through our website if something does come up later. And we want to thank you for taking the time to join us this evening. We sincerely appreciate it. We appreciate you engaging with us. Using tools such as Mentimeter to get your immediate feedback is very helpful. And then also the comments, the questions, the feedback that you've posted here is very helpful for us. We take that information and we use it to build our presentations and make sure we have a clear message and to just make sure that we're being very clear about what the next steps are and how this project works. So again, our contact information is listed here. If you do have questions, brt@piercetransit.org, please don't hesitate to reach out. And again, we do have that comment form on our website. It'll be available through July 15th, and you can expect to see a recording of this presentation posted the end of the week. So with that, just give you one last thank you and hope that everybody has a wonderful evening.